Mass is sui generis. It does not fit into the categories of Aristotle, who believed that every substantial change involved a change in the appearances, or what he called accidents. When I eat an apple, it loses its perceptible qualities as well as its substance as an apple. It becomes part of me. But in the consecration of bread and wine at Mass, the outward appearances remain unchanged. The Church has coined the term transubstantiation to designate the process by which the whole substance, and only the substance, is changed into the substance of Christ's body and blood. A special word is needed to designate a process that is unique and unparalleled. In teaching that the species are unchanged, the Church indicates that the physical and chemical properties remain those of bread and wine. Not only do they look and weigh the same, they retain the same nutritive value that they had before the consecration. It would be futile to try to prove or disprove the real presence by physical experiments, because the presence of Christ is spiritual or sacramental, not physical in the sense of being measurable. To clarify the Church's teaching on the real presence, it will be helpful, I think, to contrast it with several erroneous positions. The presence of Christ may be understood either too carnally or too mystically, too grossly or too tenuously, too naively or too figuratively. The naively realist error may be illustrated by the reaction of the Jews at Capharnaum, who were shocked by the words of Jesus. They evidently thought that he was advocating cannibalism, which they rightly regarded as a horrible sin. Some Christians have understood the presence of Christ in the Eucharist in too materialistic a way, without sufficiently distinguishing between his natural and his sacramental presence. They sometimes imagine that he could suffer if the host were desecrated, or that he could be lonely in the tabernacle. I read somewhere of a young schoolgirl who feared that if she ate ice cream after taking Holy Communion, Jesus would suffer from the cold. In the early Middle Ages, a number of theologians, following Paschasius Radbertus, maintained that Jesus in the Eucharist takes over the forms of bread and wine as his own proper appearances. Why could he not do so, they asked, since in the resurrection he appeared as a pilgrim and a gardener, not readily recognized by his disciples. What we see when we look upon the host and what we swallow in Holy Communion, they tell us, is the body and blood of Christ in a disguised form. Some even went so far as to say that in the consecration, the elements lose the natural nutritive capacity that they had as bread and wine. To avoid the implication that Christ in glory could suffer indignity, some early medieval thinkers held that the body of Christ on the altar is not the same as the one in heaven. In fact, they spoke of three bodies of Christ: his natural body, which is now in heaven, his sacramental body, which is the Eucharist, and his ecclesial body, which is the Church. This position has never been condemned by the Church, but it is no longer widely held, perhaps because, contrary to the minds of its advocates, it seems to suggest that the body in the Eucharist is not really the one born of the Virgin Mary. If so, we could not sing to the Eucharist, Ave verum corpus natum de Maria Virgine, hail, holy, hail, true body, born of the Virgin Mary. St. Thomas Aquinas develops what we may call a mediating position. On the one hand, he avoids speaking of the Eucharist as a special body, sacramental or mystical, but on the other hand, he asserts that the risen and glorified body of Christ has a different mode of existence in heaven and in the sacrament. He contrasts Christ's existence in himself with his existence under the sacrament as two different states or modes of being. According to his natural mode of existence, Christ is in heaven, and according to his Eucharistic mode of existence, he is in the sacrament. The body of Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, but not in the way bodies are in place. Its parts and dimensions cannot be measured against other bodies. His circumference is not that of the host. In opposition to the naive realists, therefore, St. Thomas holds that when we look at the host, we do not see the shape and colors that properly belong to the body of Christ, but those of the host itself. We are not in the same situation as the disciples before the ascension, to whom Christ appeared in his own body. When we look at the host or chalice on the altar, the visible aspects or phenomena are still those that belonged to the bread and wine. St. Thomas objects to himself that some have reported seeing the boy Jesus or his most precious blood in the consecrated host. He replies that God is able to bring about a miraculous change in the host so that it could look like a boy or human blood, but that what appears in such a case could not be the qualities of Christ himself. Looking at the host or the precious blood, we cannot say that the head is here and the feet are there. Christ's presence in this sacrament resembles that of the soul in the body. My soul is not partly in my head, partly in my heart, partly in my hands, but is entirely present in the whole and in every part. And so it is with Christ in the Eucharist. When the host is broken, each fragment contains Christ as fully as did the whole. A single drop of the precious blood contains as much of him as a whole chalice. As a helpful comparison, St. Thomas uses the example of an image in a mirror. When the mirror is broken, each fragment can reflect the whole object, just as the entire mirror previously did. If the location and